Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Tara Madiesta, and I'm a Principal Research Scientist at AWS. I'm thrilled to be here today with Parice Brandies from the University of Sidney and Nathan Albrighton from RONIN. Parice will describe how she used AWS on RONIN to conduct her research, and Nathan will then give a brief tour of the features of RONIN that she used.
Thanks for that great introduction. So I thought I would start off by giving a bit of background about our research group. So we're the Australasian Wildlife Genomics Group at the University of Sydney, and we focus on utilising genomic data to help improve the conservation management of threatened species in Australia. So our group is most well known for our work on the endangered Tasmanian devil, which is this little creature right here. It's the largest carnivorous marsupial that lives on the little island of Tasmania at the bottom of Australia. And we've been working with this species for quite a few years, collecting thousands of genomic samples. And we then use that genomic data to answer a number of key conservation questions, such as which individuals should be moved to different populations, so the insurance population versus back into the wild population, which individuals have been breeding really well, which genes are linked to specific diseases or parasites, and many other questions. But we don't just work on the Tasmanian devil, we also work on a variety of other wonderful and weird marsupial species like the koala, the numbat, the bilby, and a variety of others. And so today I want to show just one example of how Amazon Web Services and RONIN have really helped us scale our genomics research over the past year. So over the past few years, the cost of sequencing has been reduced dramatically, meaning that we're now generating genetic data at a more rapid pace than ever before. And this means that our lab is now running through many more analyses than we ever have. And traditionally, we have been able to run these analyses on our locally shared high-performance computing infrastructure. But more recently, with the sheer amount of genomic data that we need to analyze, we're now pushing those local infrastructures to their limits. And this is mainly because genomic data usually needs quite high memory requirements to run, and often there are only so many high memory nodes available on these shared infrastructures. And so what that means is that we have recently been wanting to look for a new solution to analyze our genomic data, and that's when we decided to look to the cloud. So for the first few weeks, I spent learning the basics of cloud computing, just trying to understand the terminology of cloud computing, how to set up a machine with the required permissions and accounts to upload my data, run my analysis, and then take the data and the results that I need back off the cloud. And for a researcher like me, this was quite an overwhelming experience at first, just due to the sheer number of options that were available and also the number of services that Amazon Web Services provides. And I remember thinking to myself one day, surely it can't, take this long for me to be able to run my analysis. There's got to be an easier way for people like me who don't want to deal with the different complexities of, service accounts and permissions to be able to just create a machine, run my data, and get my answers back straight away. And this is when we were introduced to RONIN. So RONIN does exactly that. It takes away all the complexities from the user like myself. It runs all of that in the background without me noticing. And so it allows me to harness the full power of cloud computing without having any prior experience and without that kind of strong background in cloud computing or computing in general. And so today I want to show just one example of how we've used RONIN and a lot of its cool features to scale up our genomic pipelines. So one of the questions that we often want to ask when studying a new species is what genes are expressed in which tissues. And so if we take the bilby for an example, what we usually will do is we will collect a sample, in this case a blood sample. We will then extract the required molecules, send those molecules off for sequencing, and a couple of weeks later we will get all of the sequencing data back. Then what we need to do is we need to assemble those sequences into genes. We need to identify what genes are present, and then we can compare the expression of these genes to one another. This entire analysis can usually use up to 512 gigabytes of RAM. We usually run on about 64 CPUs. Unfortunately, a lot of genomic pipelines don't or haven't been developed in a way that can be run across multiple nodes, so they're more suited to one large machine. And this can take up to a week's wall time from start to finish. And so you can see on traditional infrastructure, we sometimes were waiting in queues for quite a long time for those high memory nodes. And then the more we use those nodes, the further back in the queue we were placed. And so we ended up with quite a big backlog of samples to chew through. But the issue is that we don't just have a blood sample, we often have many samples from many different tissues when looking at a single species. So we might want to look at the spleen for immune genes, or the pouch skin or the mammary gland for important genes that are required for the young. And there's a whole multitude of tissues that we want to analyze. And so if we're waiting 1 week or a couple of weeks even to analyze one sample, you can see how long it was taking for us to get through all of our samples. And we don't just have samples for one species like the bilby, but we have them for a variety of marsupial species. And so this was a really scalable pipeline, but our infrastructure just couldn't match that scalability. And so that's why we decided to look to the cloud for a solution. So genomics in the cloud is super easy, particularly with the RONIN platform. What I would usually do is create a single machine just to test my software installation, upload all of the data that was required. I could then test all of my scripts to make sure there was no silly errors or any syntax problems that might cause the pipeline to error. I can then monitor the pipeline from start to finish, and this allows me to check whether the CPUs are being used efficiently, how much memory the whole pipeline required, which would then allow me to either scale up or down my machine after the analysis was complete, and also see how much storage was required, because a lot of genomics pipelines create a lot of temporary files in the process that are then deleted at the end of the pipeline. So knowing exactly how much we need throughout the whole pipeline is really useful. We could then perform some pipeline optimization to make sure our scripts were running, as best as they could. And this was something I never got to experience with traditional shared infrastructure, because when you are waiting in a queue for a script to run, once you get it working, you don't want to fiddle with it and change anything, just in case that ends up causing some error. And so, instead in the cloud, when you don't have these queue times, I could really fiddle with the scripts and make sure that they were running as quickly and efficiently as possible. And just as an example, one of our most commonly used pipelines used to take about a week to run on shared HPC infrastructure, just due to queue times and, any kind of fiddling that we needed to do with any errors or problems along the way. But now, because I've really been able to knuckle down on that pipeline and really optimize it and, change a few of the parameters and get it to parallelize a bit better, we can now run that whole pipeline in just 6 hours in the cloud, which is pretty incredible. And finally, we have the cost analysis, which again is a huge benefit of RONIN. When you start using cloud computing, obviously you need to keep track of your costs, particularly if you're using your research money on the cloud computing. And RONIN makes this super easy. So at every single step along the way, you know how much every little feature or every bit of storage or compute is going to cost you. And then as you're running your compute, you will then be able to see how much that's costing you, and it's updated regularly. So you can analyze how much everything has costed up until whatever point you're using the platform on, which is really, really helpful. Then once we're finished and we're happy with our pipeline and how it's running, the feature that I wanted to focus on today are the autoscaling clusters that you can develop with RONIN. And so this means that once you have the analysis running successfully, you know what kind of compute it needs, you know that there's no errors, you know how long it's going to run for. You can then generate an autoscaling cluster with RONIN. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to submit a job for each sample on the head node, and it will automatically generate a node for each sample, run that pipeline, and then once there are no more jobs to complete, it will terminate that node for you. So just with a few button clicks, you can scale from that one sample on that one machine to basically X samples, depending on how many of those nodes are actually available from Amazon Web Services, which means this scalability is almost infinite. And so this means instead of taking 1 week to run one sample, we can now run 5 or 10 or 15 samples, or however many samples we need in 1 week, which is really incredible, and it's super easy to do with the RONIN platform. The other good feature is that because we've done our detailed cost analysis and there's information about how much the autoscaling cluster will cost you, even if all of the nodes are running at once, we can estimate how much the whole process is going to cost and know pretty well exactly how our expenses will turn out by the end of the analysis. But that's not the only helpful feature that I wanted to mention. There are a number of other helpful features, such as the cluster packaging. So basically, once you've created a cluster that you're happy with, and you've set it up with the required environment, the required software, you know what kind of nodes are needed, you can then cluster that package so that anytime you need it again, with just a few clicks, you can recreate that exact same cluster. And this is really helpful in our genomic work, because a lot of the time we're repeating the same analyses on new samples. So we might run an analysis 1 week and then a few weeks later get some new samples in, or we start working on a new species and need to rerun those same pipelines. So we can just go into the RONIN platform, click a few buttons, and we will have that cluster built again for us, ready to use and perform our analyses. This is also really good for reproducible research. So that's something that's really important in science, is being able to reproduce the analyses that you've done in the past. And this is easier than ever before with cluster packaging, because again, all of the versions of software we use, the whole environment is ready at our fingertips whenever we need it. The other helpful feature I wanted to mention is the Ganglia monitoring system. So obviously you can monitor single virtual machines using features such as the CloudWatch dashboards, but RONIN have also made it really easy to monitor your pipeline using Ganglia. So again, in just a few simple clicks, you can have the Ganglia dashboard showing you exactly what each of your nodes are doing in your autoscaling cluster. So you can keep track of how everything is running, when it's due to finish, and that kind of thing, which is really, really helpful for just making sure that you're running everything as efficiently as possible. So in summary, I just wanted to go through a few of the benefits that I've mentioned of RONIN and Amazon Web Services. First and foremost, the fact that you have complete control of your resources and your computing environment. So not only do we now not have the limitation of only having, say, 2 high memory nodes available to us in a cluster, we can have as many high memory nodes as we need to run the analysis. But not only that, we also can configure the environment exactly how we need. And that's something that I never had previous experience with before, because traditionally when you're using a shared HPC, you usually have to request for certain software to be installed, and you don't really get to set it up exactly as you want it. But in RONIN, you get to be the master of your cluster and do exactly what you need it to do. We obviously have the real-time resource monitoring, which I mentioned, so Ganglia for the autoscaling clusters, and also the CloudWatch dashboards when you're working with single machines. And that's really helpful for optimizing all of your pipelines and making sure everything's running as it should. Of course, enhanced scalability and reproducibility is a big benefit. So as I showed, it's super easy to scale your research from just one analysis to multiple analyses in parallel, very, very quickly and easily. And reproducibility is much easier with the cluster packaging feature and also the single machine packaging feature. Anything that we run can easily be rerun again and developed again in a matter of minutes. RONIN also makes it really easy to estimate your costs and track these costs as you're running different machines, which is really, really helpful to stay on top of your budget. This was something that sometimes isn't always super clear, but in RONIN, they've made it a priority to show you exactly how much each step is going to cost you. Of course, one of the biggest benefits is that there's no queue times. So instead of having to wait for your scripts to run, all of your scripts run immediately because you own the cluster, you're the only one using that cluster or that machine. And so this obviously helps get to your analyses much more quickly. RONIN and Amazon Web Services also have really simple data backup and transfer options, which was something I was very pleasantly surprised about, because working with genomic data, we often have really large data sets that we need to analyze. And having a quick way to back up that data and to transfer that data back and forth is really helpful, because it's just another thing we don't have to think about spending time doing. And of course, all of these benefits lead to one of the final benefits, which is that we have now faster time to research, and that means faster time to conservation action. So not only do we get our results back more quickly because we're now running these analyses in parallel much more quickly, but we can then feed those results eventually back into conservation action. So all of our analyses that we do at some point will have some sort of conservation implication. And so the faster we're getting to that endpoint, the faster we can then inform the conservation managers of what they might need to do or change based on the findings that we got from our genomic data. And the final benefit that I wanted to mention is that because, again, we're getting to those results more quickly, we now have so much more time to answer new questions. And that's something that's really, really cool in science, because we always have more questions to ask. And sometimes we don't always have the time to answer those questions. But now, because we're getting through our analysis so much more quickly, we do have time to answer some new cool questions, which obviously will have implications for these species as well. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that was involved in this project that I talked about today. And now I'm going to hand over to Nathan from RONIN to give you a demo of all of the cool features that I just mentioned.
Thanks so much, Parice. It's always really rewarding to hear you speak about the tools that we built for exactly the purpose we built them. My name is Nathan Albrighton. We built RONIN as a platform to accelerate research. We built it to make sure that the immense power of the AWS cloud was available and easy to use for all of the researchers that we met, to make sure that the focus was going to be about the research being performed, not the tools to get there. Now, when you log into RONIN for the first time, what you get is a project dashboard. You get to see from the top down everything that's happening in your research project. And one of the primary features of RONIN is its cost control and cost visibility. You'll see here in our dashboard that we've got a $15,000 budget. We've got $399 remaining. And as we spent this budget on infrastructure for our research, we got alerts at 25, 50, 75, and 100%. They were emailed to all of the project members, to all of the researchers involved in this project, just so that everybody involved with this research project was able to see exactly where they're up to with their spend in the AWS platform. Now, what we're going to focus on today is our HPC tools, because our HPC tools were a lot of what Parice and the team were able to lean on. And I thought it'd be easy to show just how quick and how simple we make it to log into a HPC cluster or create one from scratch. Now, if we go over to the left-hand side, you can see we have our RONIN toolset. And if we click on the Autoscaling clusters, this will take me to the project's Autoscaling cluster summary screen. Now, I've fired up a cluster here already just a moment ago, but what I'll do is I'll walk through the steps that a researcher would take to actually build a HPC cluster for the first time. So some of these steps were explained by Parice, but I thought it would be great to just show you how easy it is. Now, in here we have our Autoscaling cluster modal, or our workflow. Now, all I need to do is select my favorite operating system, my favorite scheduler, give my HPC cluster a name. Now, what RONIN's doing for me in the background is all of the networking on my HPC cluster. It's taking away so many of the complex steps of actually building a HPC environment and just making it a really simple thing for me to just, if I give it a unique name, everything else will be taken care of for me in the background. If I go to select my head node, I can actually choose from the 300 plus, I think it is at this point, server sizes and configurations that Amazon offer. So I'll just choose a general purpose machine here. When it comes to compute nodes, we get those 300 plus options again. So what we're able to do with this is build a HPC cluster or HPC environment that fits your workload specifically. So when Parice mentioned her workload and the software that they utilize, only being able to push up to a certain amount of cores when it comes to utilizing the compute nodes, we were able to tailor the HPC environment to exactly what that software could take advantage of to make sure there was no waste when it comes to the machines that we fired up. We're able to build a fit-for-purpose HPC environment. If I jump in here and I grab some of the, say, latest Intel chips on the largest of the AWS offerings when it comes to compute nodes, I can grab a 96 vCPU machine with close to 200 gig of RAM as my compute node. So I've got a lot of processing power here on each compute node that we build. In step 6, we talk about your application storage. So we've gone ahead and we've made sure that there is a really simple place for you to manage your software, your binaries, and your research environment as well. And then when we go to your shared storage, your workspace, we make it really easy for you to get, say, 200 gig worth of SSD so that you can read and write your research files in and out. When I head down to step 8, RONIN also takes care of the access to your machine. So it takes care of the SSH keys to access the HPC environment. So if I just select this here, I can select a key that's been installed on my desktop already. And when we get to our auto-scaling cluster capacity, or our minimum and maximum compute nodes, this is where we can actually define how this HPC environment behaves for our workload. Now, if I make this 120 in maximum machines, in its current setting right now, and we can see down here, we do the math down in step 11. If I launch this machine right now, it will be launched at its minimum possible capacity. It'll be $5.44 per hour. It'll have 98 vCPUs, and it'll have 200 gig of RAM. But this HPC environment has the ability to auto-scale out to 11,500 vCPUs worth of processing power and 23 terabytes of RAM. The cool thing about this, and the cool thing about running a HPC cluster on the cloud, is it will only ever be 11,000 cores worth of machine when it has 11,000 cores worth of work to be done. And as that work is completed, it will scale its way back down to the smallest possible capacity, because we only want to have compute nodes that have work to do in our project. Another cool thing that we do with RONIN, especially when it comes to cost management of managing such vast resources, is just make sure you always know at all times what you're getting into. An 11,000 core HPC environment is an incredibly powerful machine. And with that, there may be an incredibly powerful cost that comes associated with it. Now, in here, what we're able to do is actually help you take advantage of one of Amazon's key features that's very well suited to HPC workloads, which is the Amazon spot market. Now, the AWS spot market can be set up so that we can actually put in a bid for, say, $1.90. The compute nodes that I selected go for $5.33 per hour. If I enable spot, that changes the overall cost ceiling of my HPC cluster. I still get close to 1 million vCPU hours worth of processing time per week available to me. But in this case here, if it's a spot price that we're running our cluster on, we're able to bring that cost right down to a much lower ceiling before we launch it. If I go back to on-demand, we also have some advanced options here. We have the Intel HPC tools, so for workloads that are better suited and work better under the Intel compilers and Intel software stack. And we also have hyper-threading switch here to switch on and off depending on the software that you're running. Some software behaves better on either side of that switch. Now, if I hit launch my cluster here, that's all there is to actually building an 11,000 core HPC cluster for your research environment. Now, the cool thing about this is this isn't a shared environment. This can be used on a one-to-one type basis so that a single researcher can utilize this 11,000 core resource for maybe the next 3 hours and then terminate it and clean it up, take the results for what they were doing. But you have immense power in this as well. And you can do this in a really, really cheap way overall when it comes to the cost. Now, this cluster will be ready for me to log into within about 8 minutes. So from an idea of a HPC environment, all the way through to logging into an incredibly powerful resource. You've only got 8 minutes to wait with RONIN. Now, I've got a cluster that's already launched here, so I could show some of the next hardest thing to do with a HPC environment, and that's access it and then use it for your research. Now, in here, I've got my genome.ronin.cloud HPC cluster, and if I click on the top button here, which is Open with RONIN Link, what will happen is a desktop application that we wrote called RONIN Link will open, and it will create a management card for me. Now, here I now have a desktop tool to connect to and organize my research on my new HPC cluster. So if I jump into Connect to Machine and I click on a terminal, what we get is our root level access to our HPC cluster. So we can manage our storage, we can manage our data sets, we can install software. On every cluster we launch, we configure a great HPC packaging tool called SPAC. And if you put in SPAC list, you get 4,500 software packages you can install with a 3-word command. Now, this just makes some of these incredibly complicated steps a very easy process, from never launching a virtual machine before, all the way through to launching and managing a complex software stack on a HPC autoscaling cluster in the cloud. We've tried our hardest to smooth out every one of those hurdles as we arrived at them. If I go a little bit further, if we look at our cluster, Parice mentioned our Ganglia tools for performance management. We've actually built that into our RONIN link tool just to make sure it's really easy to get at and right at your fingertips when you're running a large workload. So if I click on link for my Ganglia application, put in my desktop password, RONIN link will set up an encrypted port tunnel to my HPC cluster and show me exactly how my cluster is performing across all of the compute nodes. It'll tell me how many compute nodes have joined the HPC environment. It'll tell me how they're performing, if any of them are hung, or if there's any sort of workloads I need to go and troubleshoot in that cluster environment. But we've made it a really, really simple process for you to actually get to the performance metrics of your brand new supercomputer. If we go a little bit further with RONIN link, for a lot of our brand new users to cloud, we realized a lot of our brand new users were new to Linux as well. So what we did is we actually built a desktop application tool that will bring a desktop environment to you in a very simple way for your HPC environment. So if I click on Connect to Machine and I click on Desktop, what RONIN link will do is check to see if the machine has Amazon's desktop visualization tool called DCV installed. It will make sure it is the latest version, it is configured correctly, and it will launch a brand new window which will bring me to my desktop environment that is the HPC head node directly. And that just means I can interact with this HPC environment in a much easier and more intuitive way. I can drag and drop files. I can check my data sets from here. And more importantly, if I have a visualization workload, I can actually run my HPC workload here and then monitor that visualization. I can check my models. I can see what the outputs are directly in a desktop environment that's connected. So being from a research background and building our tool, I'll start again. 3, 2, 1. Coming from a research background and having research in mind when we built and architected RONIN, one of the things we really wanted to do was make sure that all of the clever things that were discovered and built within RONIN were reproducible. In the research field, the reproducibility of your research is incredibly important. So we wanted to make that an easy set of steps as well. So if I go back to my RONIN tool in the background here and I click on the tools for my genome cluster, what we'll see here are a bunch of tools that we've built to make living with your brand new HPC environment a much easier experience. We've got checking your networking, so being able to make sure you can reach and connect to your cluster at any given time. We've got managing your backups, so being able to back up your data sets easily and quickly. We've got managing storage, being able to plug in new data sets or plug in new drives to receive data sets. We made all of that easy. We have our smart schedule, so you can schedule your cluster to only come on, say, the weekends to process a batch workload. But one of the things that we're most proud of for the research space is being able to package up your HPC environment. From this 11,000 core capable HPC environment that we've built here in our genomics cluster here, I'm able to just click Package Cluster. I can put recording a webinar into my package, which has my genomics software. I'm able to actually choose an avatar, so I can pick it out, or I can upload one so I can easily find it again when I'm planning to use it again. And then I get to choose what storage goes into this package. So if I have a use case where my other colleagues inside our project would like to just use the software I've configured on this cluster, I can actually detach the working drive and not include, say, my raw data sets and my outputs. And that would create almost a workbench scenario where it's a HPC environment that is exactly the environment I configured, but reusable for my project. If I include the whole thing end to end, we have an exact copy, a point in time of the complex HPC environment we crafted. This will have all of our software, all of our binaries. It'll have all of our raw data, our output data. It'll also have every single configuration and binary just locked in time as a reusable image that we can launch again for the next workload that we want to run, or for, say, a peer review on a paper we've submitted. If I just hit Create Machine Package down here, RONIN will alert you that it needs to reboot the cluster to make sure that it's finished what it's doing, so it doesn't interrupt anything you have in flight. And when you click Reboot and Package My Machine, RONIN will go through this machine's configuration and build a reusable image to launch a brand new HPC cluster of exactly the same configuration in the background. And now that we've created our package of our custom genome cluster, we can actually go and launch that from our project settings. So if I go to a new Autoscaling cluster and I select Search Project Packages, you'll see the very last package at the very top of the list is our genomics HPC environment. If I select this, hit Close, it lets me know that Slurm was the scheduler on this machine, so it's already pre-selected. I can say, look, the next step in our pipeline, so we'll go next. The cool thing about this, though, is if the next step in my pipeline requires different infrastructure, so the first one we built was compute heavy. This step might be a memory heavy process. What I can do is actually build the next cluster on a memory heavy type workload. So I'll just use the general purpose machine for my head node. I'll go to our compute nodes. I'll select a machine or a machine configuration that has a large memory footprint. So look, I need 122 gigabytes of RAM per compute node. I already know that, or it's already pre-selected how much storage I need for a handful of these things, but I might add a little bit more storage for my applications. I'll select the same key to launch my machine. I'll set my auto-scaling limits. Now for this machine, I might want to keep it a little bit lighter. So we'll go, I only want, we'll go with 15. 15 compute nodes. This keeps the cost manageable for me. I know it will only ever scale out to a maximum of 242 vCPUs with 1.8 terabytes of RAM. I can enable Spot maybe on this workload because we might want to keep the cost right down. This is maybe a batch process or something that we do in the background. And again, I can just hit launch my cluster. And within 8 minutes, an exact copy of my first HPC environment will be launched with a brand new infrastructure footprint that might be fit for purpose for another stage inside our research. So it just means you've got so much flexibility with the scale of AWS and the simple tools we've put in place to manage it, to take full advantage of what power lies in those options. Thanks so much to Tara and Parice today. We really enjoyed recording this webinar, and we've had an amazing level of support from AWS in our journey to make research faster, make it quicker, make it easier for researchers to take advantage of the AWS cloud. I'd like to just finish with, if you'd like to get in touch with us, we're easy to find. We're at ronin.cloud, and if you'd like to see further demos or dive deeper into any of our features, because we have a lot of them, please just reach out. The contact details are on the website. Thank you very much for your time.